Dear students, hope you all are doing well. It's Taira Liaquat, lecturer, University of Education, Vihari campus. In my previous lectures, I discussed about project proposal. We saw different types of project proposals and we discussed the elements of the project proposal. So today what we are going to do is to discuss about the project proposal guide, which is finalized by our board of study, and it contains all the necessary information. We have finalized some elements which are necessary in the project proposal. So if we go through this guide, you will be seeing some elements which are enlisted in my slide. These are project title, project overview statement, project goals, project objectives. There is a certain discrimination between the goals and objectives, which I will be discussing with you in the next section. It would contain high-level system components, list of optional functional units, exclusions, application architecture, and Gantt chart. So starting up with the first section, it is the project title. The title should be clear and unambiguous. We don't need to make it cute. You have to think of your title as a mini abstract. A good title should paint a quick picture for the reader of the key ideas of your project. The words you use in your title should clearly reflect the focus of your proposal. The most important words should come first and then the less important words. Try to remove words from your title that really are not necessary for understanding. And try to use only a single sentence for your title. If sentence is going too long, then we will cut that sentence in two sections by using a colon. Do not attempt to use the title as an abstract of your entire proposal. If your proposal is built on collaborating with other groups or organizations, it is usually a good idea to include their names in the title or cover page. The second part of the project proposal is the project overview statement. It is an executive summary. Be specific and concise. Don't go into detail on aspects of your proposal that are further clarified at later point of your proposal. The project overview should paint a picture of your proposal in the mind of the reader. It should establish a framework so that the rest of the proposal has a frame of reference. Use the project overview to begin to show your knowledge of the organization from which you are requesting funds. Key concerns of the funding organizations can be briefly identified in the relation to your project proposal. If you will be collaborating with other organizations, make sure some of their interests are also highlighted in the project overview, because this is a work of mutual understanding. This can assist in strengthening the collaboration by recognizing them at very beginning of your proposal. The best time to prepare the project overview is after you have completed the entire proposal and you understand all aspects of your proposal very well. Let the overview be your last piece of writing and then insert it at the beginning of your proposal. Try to keep in mind that someone will be reviewing your proposal and you would like to have this person be very positive about what you have written. The project overview will probably form a strong impression in the mind of the reviewer. Work on your project overview so that you can avoid giving this person the opportunity to say things like that your idea is not original, your rationale is weak, writing is vague, uncertain outcomes you have, and your proposal does not have relevant experience, or you have does not relevant experience. Problem is not important which you are addressing, proposal is unfocused, and project is too large. In the next slide, I am showing you about the project overview statement template, and if you saw it, if I enlarge this, the first element is the project title. You have to write your project title. Then if you are working in group, you have to mention who would be the group leader, and you have to mention the names of the project members. In the next section, you have to write the project goals, and then underneath that section you have to discuss about, or you have to write objectives of your project. Remember that the goals, there is a slight difference between goals and objectives. Basically, the scope of goal is broader, it is used in the broader sense, and objectives are used in the narrow sense. Then you have to mention the project success criteria. You have to define your own criteria of success. Then you have to write the assumptions, risks, and obstacles. Then in the next section you have to write the organization address. In case you are working in collaboration with some organization, and you have to write the name of the organization you are working for. Next, you have to write the type of the project, whether it is a research project or it is a development project. Then in the next section you have to write the target end users, target audience. Then you will write about the development technology you are using, whether you are using object oriented approach or you are using structured approach. What platform we are using, we have to mention it here, whether we are using web-based platform or we are using distributed platform, desktop based, it is a setup configuration or other type of the project, you have to mention it here. And underneath that section there is a suggested project supervisor who is going to supervise your project, and in the next section there is a approved by and date. So this is the whole project overview statement template. Basically, we write this template at the end of the project proposal when we are very much clear about everything. But this overview statement is placed in the beginning of the project proposal. Next section, we have to write about project goals and objectives. Again, as I have told you earlier, there is a slight difference between goals and objectives. Goals are the large statements of what you hope to accomplish, but usually they are not very measurable. They are broader in the sense and their scope is large. They create the setting for what you are proposing. Objectives are operational and it describes specific things you will be accomplishing in your project, and these are very measurable. Your objectives will form the basis for the activities of your project and will also serve as the basis for the evaluation of your project. Try to ensure that there is a considerable overlap between the goals and objectives for your proposal and the goals and objectives of the funding organization. If there is not a strong overlap of goals and objectives, then it might be best to identify a different funding organization. because if there would be a gap between the goals, our goals, and the goals of that organization for which we are going to build a proposal, then obviously it would not be acceptable. Measurable objectives for your project should be presented. If you are dealing with things, it is easier for them to be measured than if you are dealing with abstract ideas. If we have the focus point, then we will nail it and we will get success by achieving. Your proposal is easier for prospective funding organization to understand, and the outcomes are much more clear if you describe your project in measurable ways. So what we will do here is we will prepare a goal of our project, and we will describe and we will prepare the objectives for our project proposals, and our objectives should be measurable. In the next section, we have to mention about the high-level system components. Here we have to write information about the main functional units of the entire system. Functional units to be included will be the inclusive components of the project development, so that the system must perform without taking any physical constraint into consideration. High-level system components are generally a set of cooperating components assembled together to deliver a solution to a problem. They are frequently identified in terms of inputs, outputs, processes, stored data that are needed to satisfy the system improvement objectives. If these components are missing, the system fails to fulfill the primary mission. Then in the next section, we have to list optional functional units. A list of functional units should be present, which would include a description of other features, characteristics, and constraints that define a satisfactory system. These functional units would be developed under a certain condition, for example, a technology, an expertise, or time dependent. Example of these optional function units would include performance, throughput and response time, ease of learning and use, budget, cost and cost saving, timetables and deadlines, documentation and training needs, quality management, and security and internal auditing controls. They are often requirements that specify need of compliance with any legal and regulatory development requirements. They can also be design constrained due to operating system used, the platform environment, compatibility issues, or any application standards that apply. In general, you can say that any requirement that does not allow for more than one design option should be regarded as a design constraint. If the optional functional units are missing in the system can still fulfill its fundamental mission, but with degraded service quality. While gathering and validating the optional functional requirements, maintain assumptions and issues list. Some activities will not give you satisfactory answers. This can be due lack of information or simply because you consider the answer threatens the viability of the design. Therefore, you have to create two lists and maintain them through the design study. Any assumptions you make during requirements and design process, including the rationale or thought process behind those assumptions, Assumptions may be used to identify related sub-projects of items of work, which are outside the scope of or after this project and major issues. These issues should be reviewed with the customer at the end of each phase. The assumptions need to be reviewed also at the end of each phase, but the customer might not always be the correct person for less important ones. Assumptions and issues apply to all artifacts but are particularly common for non-functional requirements. In the next section, we have to mention about exclusions. It is a list of functional units which will not be intended to be developed or discussed during any point of the project development. Time constraints or lack of resources for the fulfillment of required task or any sort of constraint preventing the completion of the functional unit could be described here. Next is the application architecture. It defines overall application architecture. For example, whether we are going for a 2-tier architecture or it would be a 3-tier architecture. It must contain a diagram depicting the system architecture properly. Architecture is the highest level concept of a system in its environment. The architecture of a software system at any given point in time is its organization or structure of significant components interacting through interfaces. Those components being composed of successively smaller components and interfaces. Architecture can also be defined as the organizational structure of the system. Architecture can be recursively decomposed into parts that interact through interfaces, relationships that connect parts, and constraints for assembling parts. Parts that interact through interfaces include classes, components, and subsystems. There are a number of typical patterns of distribution in system, depending upon the functionality of the system and the type of application. In many cases, the distribution pattern is informally used to describe the architecture of the system. Through the full architecture encompasses this, but also many more things. For example, many times a system will be described as having client-server architecture, although this is only the distribution aspect of the architecture. Next element is the Gantt chart. The Gantt chart enumerates the activities to be performed on the vertical axis and their corresponding duration on the horizontal axis. It is possible to schedule activities by either early start or late start logic. In the early start approach, each activity is initiated as early as possible without violating the precedence relation. In late start approach, each activity is delayed as much as possible as long the earliest finish time of the project is not compromised. In the next section, we have to write about the hardware and software specification, any specific type of hardware, machine type required, any specific operating system required, or other utilities which are required we have to mention in this section. Then we have to write about tools and techniques used with reasoning. In application tool which are to be used on the front and back end of the system to be developed should be listed. The reason for these tools should also be enlisted. Identify what the needs for tool support are and what are the constraints by looking at the following. There are two types of tools, designing tools and development tools. Designing tools में यूज़ हो सकती हैं, rational rows UML for designing use cases or process diagram. Then in the development tools, we can use Eclipse for Java, existing tools, and etc. So this was the end of the lecture. Hope you all understand it well. Take care of yourself. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.